Good day, everyone, and welcome to the 16th anniversary celebrations of the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. My name is Danny Kuan, and I am Dean of the school. 2020 is, of course, the year of the COVID-19 global pandemic. Devastating as the pandemic is, it comes on the back of four other great global disruptions. First, a geostrategic rivalry whose intensity has disrupted international trade, technology, and a range of all human activity. Second, a growing disaffection in all of our societies on the rich-poor income divide, social stagnation, where we see so many of our fellow citizens standing on the sidelines, losing hope, prospects, livelihoods, as others race on ahead. Third, a disenchantment of science and technology that borders on the dangerous, rejecting the lessons of the Enlightenment. Remember, in the run-up to COVID-19, the World Health Organization had identified the anti-vax movement, the vaccine hesitancy movement, as one of the top 10 global public health threats. That movement was one where parents would not allow their children to be vaccinated against common ailments. Fourth, deglobalization and protectionism. As all nations around the world retreat into populism, a cozy nationalism, a comfortable rejection of the fruits of globalization that will ultimately be destructive. Historians of the future will record 2020 and separate nations into those that governed well and those that did not. All of us individually are going through hardships, but no one signed up for a world where the global economy would turn around from 3% annual growth to negative 5%, where the US unemployment rate would go from the lowest it had been in the last 5 decades to the highest it has experienced in the last 90 years, all within the space of a devastating 60 days. This is the world that we're in. But the school continues to navigate this dangerous landscape, as it always has. Health and safety for our community remain the top priority, and as we continue to treat all members of our community with fairness and respect, our mission continues to be a leading school, to develop ourselves into a leading school of public policy, to continue to develop lessons that point to Singapore as a global point of reference for public policy and management. We continue to teach the line where governance needs to be improved. We seek to transform the societies and the economies around us, that everyone may enjoy a more sustainable, better future. We seek to continue to develop thought leadership. All of this is important in times of adversity that we're going through, as much as it is important in good times. Over the years, our school's anniversary celebrations have taken different forms and explored different ideas. In line with both last year's Festival of Ideas and our continuing Asia Thinker series, the school continues to develop lessons in good governance and thinking ahead on governance for the future. We continue to reach out to the local and international communities to engage in conversations that raise public understanding on the challenges that we face locally and internationally. The topic for this afternoon's discussion is governance of disruptive technologies. Obviously here, we mean technologies that are digital and data-based. This encompasses challenges in cyber infrastructure, 5G, artificial intelligence, autonomous machines and systems, blockchain technologies. All of these disrupt our lives at a deeply personal, individual level, just as much as they do the large-scale geopolitical landscape. These can all be used for nefarious purposes by those who intend us harm, just as much as they can be used for good. Thank you all for tuning in. Please participate actively in the discussion this afternoon, and I hope you will find these ideas helpful, informative, and provocative. Thank you all.
Thanks, Dinqua, for that introduction. So let me begin by introducing myself. My name is Aras Taihaq. I'm a faculty in the school, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Professors Wu, Mancini, and Aralal. We are going to talk about governance of disruptive technologies. So the question is, why do we need to talk about this? Dean alluded to some points, so let me elaborate further. We know that we are facing and dealing with a set of emerging technologies, AI, robotics, autonomous systems, blockchains, 3D printing, 5G, augmented reality, virtual reality, and Internet of Things. And these new technologies are being adopted through a set of initiatives through smart cities, e-governance, e-health, fintech technology, and others. These technologies, given their disruptive nature, are having effects on threatening markets, social and political order. And this is due to the pacing issue that we have here, that it takes a lot of effort to try to address the concerns that these technologies raise and come up with solutions to address their risk and negative consequences. In addition to this, one other factor that we need to take into account is COVID-19 and how that has exacerbated the issue that we are facing, which means not only do we have to deal with the disruptive technologies, but also we have to deal with uncertainties that COVID-19 is bringing forward. This doesn't mean that these technologies are not of interest. Of course, these technologies are being developed and promoted because we think they're going to have positive effect, increase efficiency in our systems, improve lives, and have a lot of wonderful benefits that we talk about today. As was mentioned, in addition to those positive benefits, they can have risks and unintended consequences that could affect citizens' privacy, safety, health, and livelihood, and other factors that are important to us. One other issue that is relevant in this context is that at times these disruptive technologies don't bring, or in other words, they don't really provide all of the benefits to everyone. Sometimes risks are taken by governments and society and benefits go to others, which require government intervention to address some of these challenges. Scholars are developing different strategies to address these issues, which is the point that we are going to discuss today. So with that, the order of the day today for our discussions is that first, we will introduce ourselves and our background and the research we are doing in the school on these topics. Then we'll have a discussion about a number of points relevant to this introduction that I just made. And then we'll take questions from the audience. So I myself focus on socio-technical systems and addressing issues that relate to interface of technology and society. How do we design policies and address concerns to deal with this complexity in our systems? How technology actually affects the policy process and how we do things. For example, technology such as crowdsourcing also can affect the process in which we are trying to do our democratic processes or engage in policy making. And on top of that, we also have issues around governance of technology, understanding the risk and unintended consequences, and addressing their issues, regulatory factors, interactions between the technology companies and society and government as a whole. So on this front, what I do myself is I primarily focus on governance of AI, autonomous systems, and robotics, and platforms in terms of looking at ride sharing, sharing economy, crowdsourcing, and broader issues of interactions between technology companies and regulators and the public as a whole. This focus is based on regulatory and governance issues, as I mentioned, issues around risk and regulatory life cycle. And for this endeavor, we have a range of projects that me and my colleagues in the school have working on these topics. So with that, I would like to hand over to Professor Wu to talk about his background and his initiatives on studying technology at the school.
Hi everyone, my name is Wu Minh Huong. I have been here with Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy since 2006. My research and teaching focus on economic growth with a special focus on Asia and the impact of the digital revolution. So as all of us have seen, the world has experienced remarkable changes driven by the digital revolution over the past 4 or 5 decades. In fact, many dreams have come true, from personal computer to mobile phones, from the internet to social media, from all kinds of e-services to telecommuting. My research tried to quantify the impact and contribution of the digital revolution to economic growth and development, and also identify the policy instruments for effectively promoting digital transformation and digital adoption. Here, I would like to emphasize 3 big things. I try to examine. The first one, unlike the earlier revolution, the digital revolution has taken place not only in a few countries or a few sectors, but across a nation and in every corner of the society. The second one, the digital revolution keeps improving at very rapid pace, and we can expect some unthinkable things to happen in the near future. And the third one, digital revolution create a lot of value for us, but also pose a lot of challenges, if not formidable challenges. It requires us to develop the governance system that effectively to make it very powerful and productive force for change and for building a better future for the world.
Thank you, Professor. Professor Mancini, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Welcome also on my behalf. My name is Francesco Mancini. I'm an Associate Dean and Associate Professor in Practice here at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. Now, our research is focusing on the impact of these technologies that you just heard from my colleague on social cohesion and more broadly on peace. Now, the debate is very often shaped by, on one hand, those who are very enthusiastic about technology as a force, as a positive force. On the other hand, highly pessimistic views, those who are emphasizing the risk and the negative impacts. And we're looking into both sides. We're obviously very concerned about the destructive role of technologies, in particular cyber threats, but also the use of information and communication technologies to polarize societies, to spread extreme views, and the perpetuation of bias and stereotypes that we see in the real world. But we're also looking into the power of transformation that some of these technology can have to prevent conflict, to foster peaceful and harmonious societies, and to make us safer. And so just to make a couple of concrete examples, apps that give you the safest way to get back home, not just the fastest in Mexico City, or those who work to identify fake news on social media in Indonesia. They're called hoax, or to prevent extreme radicalization. Apps that make you to empathize with target of racism in Australia. The use of games, video games, to educate younger people to minimize negative influence in Kenya, and digital technology to make peace processes more comprehensive in Colombia. And the list is very long. And this is what I call peace tech. It's a technology that bridges divides. It's a technology that is fundamentally is a mediating technology that is used to augment our ability to engage positively with others. And so we know that we can create apps to make you buy something. We know that we can make an app to make you eat healthier or exercise more. Then we can also make apps that can be designed to promote positive social behaviors. And we think that this is an extremely important challenge in today's policy making.
Thanks for that introduction. Professor Araral?
Thank you, Aras. My name is Eduardo Araral. I'm associate professor at the school. In terms of teaching, I teach a course called ABCD, EFGHIJ, blah, blah, blah. ABCD is AI, blockchain, cloud data. EN, their implications for education, finance, governance, healthcare, inequality, and jobs. I've started to teach that this semester and last semester as well. It was a well-received course. And my research also revolves roughly around these themes. I've done work with colleagues with Microsoft, with Amazon. I have a current project with Facebook in the Harvard Institute for Quantitative Social Science, where we mine Facebook data for social media and democracy. I'm also working on an MOE-funded project on jobs and disruption, as well as political trust.
Thank you. Professor Wu, you mentioned digital transformation. Could you expand on that and tell us more about how digital transformation creates value for society and the economy, and how can we better promote it?
Yes, digital revolution or digital technology create a lot of value for us. And I can look at the value creation from two angles. The first one is the process, and the second one is the outcome. So in terms of process, we can look at the learning and innovation. People in this day can have access to global knowledge and to share the knowledge with, their network, billion people. So whatever innovation they have, they can actually benefit from that one and share with other one. So the market for the innovation are also huge. So definitely the supply and demand for learning and innovation is remarkable. The second one is a decision-making quality. So everyone now have much better access to information, so can make much better decision and enhancing efficiency. The third one, I see the coordination, effectiveness, the sharing economy, and platformization. So enhancing the synergy. That's also important. The fourth one, the automation. So we can see a lot of robots everywhere, in factory, in transport, and in many places. The fifth one, actually, the massive shift from offline to online. You can see e-service, become prevailing modes of choice in the future. But the last two, I would like to think, I would like to emphasize most important, the reinvention of business model. Now, the company have to rethink a lot about what kind of business model they should have in the future. For example, I can imagine, for example, Singapore Airlines one day will become one of the largest vendor of cloud computing. For example, rather than just flying, passenger like in the past. So that's the big change. For another one, for example, our school in the near future can offer courses to students around the world. They don't have to come to Singapore to learn, and we can become a platform mobilizing professors around the world using the name of Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy to promote our belief and experience. And even, so a lot of reinvention in business model, I expect to create a lot of value. But the last one, I think the most important thing is mindset change. And conceptualization of the development strategy also have to change a lot. For example, I think, for example, in the case of Estonia, I think Singapore can learn from them. So e-residency, can attract, dozens of million people, become the resident of the country, so that they can support the country, engage in business here. They don't have to come here, so they don't face any physical constraint, but can create a lot of value for us. And that actually the country like Singapore have, super advantage, leverage their strength, unique strength so far and reputation. So that's actually the process perspective. On the outcome perspective, I look at the 3 E here: efficiency, effectiveness, and evolution. So in terms of efficiency, you can see digital technology help us increase the gains, expanding the gains a lot and reduce the cost. So definitely efficiency is huge everywhere, in every sector. But the second one, effectiveness, in terms of enhancing the foundation of long-term development, increasing transparency, accountability, and integrity of all kind of people, from the leadership to the citizens. But the third one I really like, actually, the evolution. So actually it enhances our resilience, coping with any shock, and people actually experience significant evolutionary progress after the shock. Like a COVID-19, now we feel totally comfortable with teaching online, learning online, and do a lot of things online, and definitely the world have been changing for better after in the post-COVID era.
Thank you very much. So this is a question for all of the panel members. We talked about the positives of these technologies coming on board, but on top of that, we also have this sort of disruptions that come as a result of these new technologies. What do you see as the most major risk and challenges we face because of these disruptive technologies, generally speaking, and particularly for ASEAN? So maybe Professor Mancini can start.
Sure, thank you. Let me start saying that most of us see technology as something that is neutral. A technology is neither good or bad. It depends how you use it. So for example, a radio, you can use it to listen to music, but you can also use it to spread the genocide. And I agree with that. But new digital technologies are not neutral. The algorithms and the models behind are designed to make us behave in a certain way. This is generally done with benign goals, to make us buy a new pair of shoes or to go to a certain restaurant. But these technologies are not neutral because they modify our behaviors and also our cognitive capacities, the way we think, by design. And because these technologies are so pervasive in our lives, they can actually alter our cognitive capacities, our mental and social features. And these can happen in very different ways around the world, from Philadelphia to Phnom Penh, but it is happening. And in fact, we have seen violence, for example, being enhanced by digital technologies, with examples across the globe, from the United States to India, from Sri Lanka to Myanmar. In this conversation of risk, I think there are essentially 3 structural challenges that we have to face. One is what I call the information pollution. So the info pollution is that a deluge of information. And all information is delivered in the same way. It doesn't matter if it's an opinion for a mysterious blog or is a well-researched study from a university, you will receive it in the same way. Very hard to distinguish. Second, the get excited goal. And what I mean by that is a lot of these digital communication technologies are promoting strong reactions. Because obviously they need to keep us engaged, algorithms are explicitly engineered to promote items that generate strong reaction. And finally, there are the filter bubbles. These are algorithms that are designed by platforms to exacerbate our human tendency to have ties with those similar to us. And so algorithms feed us things that we like. But this narrows our vision, our options, creating closed systems that reject alternative narratives and limit mutual dialogue. And this is socially a big problem. Particularly in Southeast Asia, I see a big challenge because in very diverse nations, where most of Southeast Asia are, from a point of view of societies, from a point of view of multi-ethnicity, multi-religion, these bubbles are not good because they're limiting our capacity to emphasize with the other, to dialogue, and eventually also to live together in a peaceful way. So these to me are the key risks and challenges that I see in these digital technologies.
Thank you very much. Ed, could you share your views?
Yeah, no, if you think about Southeast Asia, it's quite a diverse country, from very capable state like Singapore to middle income countries like Thailand, Malaysia, Philippines, Indonesia, to other upcoming countries like Cambodia, Myanmar. So, but the rate of speed of these digital technologies does not respect the capacity of the country, right? So yesterday, Myanmar just had an election, and thankfully there was no bloodshed or violence that we saw with Rohingya and so on and so forth. But we cannot thank Mark Zuckerberg for preventing that, but because we paid the price, Myanmar paid the price of that neglect that Facebook did in a few years ago, right? Costly mistake, right? What I'm trying to say is that the capacity of governments to deal with the risks and the challenges of these new technologies is quite varied. And because it's new, people are regulators and politicians are grappling how to handle these issues. So just take simple example, the introduction of Grab or Gojek is accompanied by many protests, pullback, pushback, until finally the governments manage to find a way around. Airbnb is the same. Regulation of social media, governments have different approaches to regulation of social media. How tight rules will be on data protection and data ownership. Some countries are quite restrictive, right? Some are quite liberal. So this is a challenge, and I don't see this. And some analysts have called for the harmonization of these regulations, which frankly will not happen because different countries run on different pace. But again, these technologies run very fast. But the challenge now is, how do you get the governments up to speed to deal with these challenges before they burn your house down?
Thank you. Professor Wu, do you have other points to add to this?
Yeah, actually, I just want to emphasize the potential risk of digital divide, because I see the severe cost of overlooking the effort to embrace digital technology. And if you do not have access to digital technology, the cost even more severe. But here I actually I would like to say that the financial resources is one thing, or infrastructure is another thing. But the most important thing, actually, the mindset, the digital mindset. You really have to give the embrace of digital technology a top priority in every policy agenda for the government at government level, or organizational level, or even individual level. Technology, digital technology, is the way of life. We have to embrace it to change our life for better into the future.
Excellent point. So now this brings us to the next point here, which is with COVID-19, we've talked a lot about the negatives of it, but when we think about what you just mentioned, what are the positives of COVID-19 for digitalization, and how can we do better in that regard? So it's open to everyone, but I guess I'll start with Professor Mancini. Because
no, listen, let me just say this. Let's take COVID-19 as an opportunity, right? And the opportunity is to actually embrace that digital disruption that my colleague Kuan was just mentioning before. Why? Well, because it actually forces us to get serious about it. And let me just make an example very close to home, which is education. Now, we all knew in our universities that digital technology were going to disrupt the way we learn, the way we teach. But in reality, there were not a lot of incentive to do something about it because our classrooms were full. But now our classrooms are empty. So now we really have to think through how to teach online, how to engage people online, how to restructure the way we share knowledge, right? So for me, COVID is playing a positive role in creating immediate and urgent incentives to actually embrace that digital transformation culture that Kuan was mentioning before. Obviously, on the other hand, all this is happening so fast that is emphasizing some of those risks that we were talking about before. So all those issues of info pollution, of bubbles, and get excited goals, they're all emphasized in this moment when we are forced to do digital engagement and not being able to do social engagement. And so this dichotomy is making these challenges even stronger.
Thank you very much. Ed, one of the things that is relevant when we talk about digitalization is network bandwidth. And we have all, as people that have been teaching, have experienced that in our classrooms. So one of the key solutions that potentially might be relevant here is 5G. How does 5G play into COVID, and how do you see ASEAN dealing with the challenges of 5G when it comes to geopolitical factors that influence it vis-a-vis China and US?
Right. So there's a lot of hype around 5G, and I listened to the experts about 5G, and these are the real experts who actually build and design this, right? The real engineers behind the thing. And I asked them, so what can 5G do that we cannot do with 4G? And you'd be astounded at what they would say, right? So you can do remote surgery. You watch TV, Singtel's promo of 5G as a drone trying to fight a fire. You can have a better gaming experience, so on and so forth. And I ask myself, really, this is it? This is what 5G can do for us? And the switching cost of 5G from 4G is quite huge because you have to put up new antennas, the switching costs, the cost of bandwidth, and if the country is relatively poor, then it would just be faster way of eating up your data. And for what? Better gaming experience or what? So that's one. So what is the business case for 5G other than what is being hyped by the telcos? The other one, of course, is 5G as a linchpin of U.S.-China rivalry, right? Huawei caught in the middle, and it's forcing countries to choose whether you are choosing Huawei or the other technologies. And should that be the case, that the country X would have to be forced to abandon Huawei, which is the least cost solution, simply because that country is being threatened by a big country? I don't think that would be a fair deal for that particular country, right? So in a free market, you choose the best deal for your country, least cost, best service. But because of geopolitics, then you are given this false choice of under this threat. So not good. Not good. So first, you need to have a good business case. Then countries are divided into this digital divide.
Thank you. I want to add one point to this, which is the low latency of the technology is very important when it comes to application of AI, let's say in autonomous systems. That's particularly important because now the challenge a lot of times is computational power and ability to transmit information fast. That limits these technological developments. So I think it will come into play in that front quite dramatically to allow us to use certain technologies right now that because of bandwidth issues we have difficulty with. What happens at this day is a lot of times there's compression of the data when, like, let's say you're testing a robotic system, and the operators or people that are using this technology have difficulty, and that increases the risks. So potentially 5G technology and increased connectivity can have benefits on that. Now, what are the other factors?
Can I say
Sure.
something? If you ask Alibaba what is the best use case of 5G and Internet of Things, the best use case that they can offer for now, after 3 years of experiment, is to use it for smart factory for garments. Right? And the use case, the argument is that instead of waiting for a 30-day cycle of design, patenting, and crafting, and then to the market, it takes 30 days. With Internet of Things, you can have your customized shoes or garments in, say, 10 days, less so. So 20 days, savings. But then again, you look at the other side, then okay, what is the impact on workers? Would a lot of workers lose their jobs because of this, plus 3D printing and all of that stuff? So yes, there's a trade-off between speed, fast, efficiency, but there's an equity and what happens if for developing countries with a lot of surplus labor, what are you going to do with the surplus labor? Right?
Yeah, great point. So let's expand on this. We talked about digitalization in the context of 5G, but there's a lot more to it. So could you expand a bit more about what are the other aspects of digitalization that relates to COVID and can help us with dealing with some of our societal challenges?
I think the nature of development is actually effective responses to emerging challenges. So the greater challenges we face, the more profound development we can expect. So in my view, the COVID-19 pandemic is great challenges, unprecedented challenges, and you can also expect unprecedented development in the time to come. So here I'd like to share with you the example, and I found it amazing to me also. That's actually the micro-credential here in our school. Last year, we received instruction from the school and the NUS that you have to have, weekly online exercise and, have to break your course into micro-credential. You could not receive it, with any enthusiasm. You have to do that anyway. But now it turned out to be is amazing. So my experience with my 40 students in my micro-credential teaching, the economic development in the digital age, I think amazing. Student interaction and the pact of knowledge, we can foster student learning and sharing and with sympathy and with productivity, everything there. So here I draw 3 lessons here. So when we face the challenges like COVID, it turned out to be a big thing for us to grow much faster. But it needs 3 critical conditions here. The first one, definitely, we call the organizational excellence. Definitely the school give us wonderful support, no question about that. Everything on set, so we do it very well. The second one, I really like it one, actually the bold move of the NUS. Before COVID, you have to think about micro-credential already, So how to break a course of 13 weeks into just 4 days, 12 hours a day. Unbelievable, no one could imagine that we can deliver it very well. It turned out to be an excellent one. And the third one, actually the attitude. We always think about embracing changes. It's always better. By us, it's not, in general, it's not good, but by us, the word change always good and very productive. So I would like to emphasize that actually the big move before something happened, and with excellent in organization and the positive attitude for change, definitely a critical factor for us to build a better future. Even we have to face any shock, including COVID or any future shock we can see.
Ed, one of the biggest challenges that governments around the world face in this COVID is how to deliver this financial support to their population, small businesses, as quickly as possible. And we've seen how governments around the world, many governments failed in this area, with a few exceptions. Singapore government is an exception. But if you look at UK, US, how long did it take for them to deliver the check? 1 month, 2 months? These are powerful countries with advanced digital technologies, and they cannot even solve the problem of moving the money from government accounts to the accounts of. But if you look at a country like India, their digital ID and bank account project finally paid off. In 1 month's time, they were able to disburse money to 300 million people in less than 1 month's time. That's astounding, and not a lot of people talk about that, but that's quite remarkable as a solution to this pandemic, right? But in addition to the effect of pandemic on education and the movement of money, you also look at the effect on healthcare. Telehealth has now become a buzzword, right? And telehealth, well, yeah, I don't need to go and see the doctor. Maybe I can just have, chat so on and so forth, which is good for people living in remote areas, assuming they have bandwidth to have some telehealth. That's where 5G would come in, if that is possible. 5G would be useful for delivering drone essential medicines by a drone, which is already being tested, right? But also, new products have come about, which is customized insurance, targeted insurance. Insurance companies now try to get the particulars, information of their clients, but then they would give you customized premium, right? If you exercise every day during the pandemic, they'll probably give you a nice discounted premium, so on and so forth. But that's got a very important implication for the very idea of insurance. Insurance is risk pooling. You don't know the risk profile of the population, and then you price the premium, and then the insurance is provided to all. But with that new model, when the platform companies know your risk profile, then there's no more risk to be shared, because there will be discrimination on the premium, right? The high risk would be priced much higher, then the lower risk would be priced much lower. Think about how the effect of this on public pension system. Think about the effect of this new model for CPF, for example, right? Many people don't talk about that, but maybe I can think of insurance companies already tinkering about this customized model of insurance.
Great. So we talked about certain issues such as e-health, 5G, and telecommunication, education. One key challenge here is integration of many of these technologies. So, the concepts such as smart cities are talking about that. When we think about ASEAN, what do you think are the challenges of technology transfer from places like Singapore to other countries in the region to help them, have a faster speed of digitalization? I would like any of you want to share your thoughts on that.
Well, let me just kick this off. I think that one of the key challenges has been somehow also highlighted by my colleagues. It's really capacity. We are in a region that is extremely diverse in terms of government capacity, and the simple transfer of knowledge doesn't necessarily mean a transfer on the ground and a change in the reality. Accessibility, to me, remains a key challenge. And the reason I'm particularly concerned about accessibility is that the lack of access is simply perpetuating inequalities and maybe even emphasizes inequalities that already exist in societies. So in other words, those who have will continue to have more, and those who have not simply don't have that access. So the key challenge for me in terms of governance is actually bringing up that level of capacity that sometimes is not equally distributed across the country, to allow people to have access to these technologies that we're saying, so that actually those services can be delivered. So to me, this is a kind of a key essential challenge. The other one is more sophisticated, that is making sure that the algorithm, a bit what Ed was talking about insurance, the decision, the automated decision making doesn't perpetuate inequalities that exist in societies and creating even more discriminations, because that would actually prevent people that have not access to certain goods and services simply because the decision making has been automated. And it's a real risk and it has to be taken into consideration.
Excellent. You're making my job really easy. So we segued now to what governments should do to address these issues that we talked about. So Francesco mentioned capacity, but we also have other approaches that we can take. Let's expand on that, and I would like to hear your suggestions for what are the ways forward to addressing some of the things that we discussed today when it comes to the governments in the region and Singapore.
Right. So these technologies are always available, right? So 5G is always available even for the poorest of the poor countries. But the challenge really is, how do you implement digital transformation, right? Most digital transformations are driven by platform companies because they have the vested interest, they have the capacity, they have the technology, so on and so forth. But if you look at it, which government in the region, apart from Singapore, really had a viable digital solutions? Which government or countries in the region have their SMEs already digitized? Very few. Even Singapore struggles to digitize the hawker centers and then the SMEs, right? And the financial capacity is a big thing. Switching from 4G to 5G entails a lot of cost. Switching from a 4G phone to a 5G phone, there's a switching cost. And then the running cost of all the smart cities, right? Do you want a smart container or garbage can, or you just assume that the garbage collector arrives there at 6 o'clock and pick it up? Or do you want a fancy smart sensor to pick it up? So I could understand every mayor would want to have a smart city, but in reality, it's just for branding purposes. Smart city in many definition is having a nice dashboard and a nice computer and a nice camera there, but there's really no integration because they're dealing with legacy systems, and there are no staff, well-paid staff, who would run this on the ground. And they collect data, but they don't do the data analytics. So the problem of integration, as you mentioned, is really quite. This is the crux of the problem, right? There's a lot of transaction costs, switching costs, mindset issues, legacy issues, and then the political economy, right? They don't want to switch to new technologies because they are embedded with old models and old suppliers, and they just fight it out.
We have a few more minutes before we go to the questions, but let's expand on this. So I really like your analysis of what the challenge is. But for instance, when you think about Singapore, how can Singapore help? In my own research, one of the things that I think is very important is the idea that we can have transfer of knowledge at local level. For instance, when it comes to the idea of smart cities, trying to have, of course, the first thing I think in my view that's very important is local political support for these initiatives. But on top of that, having meaningful engagement. Not just the fact that sometimes in some of these initiatives you have a multinational company coming in, they, as you mentioned, they sell a dashboard and then nobody else knows how to use it. So you don't have local certification schemes, local strategies to create local innovation capability. How can Singapore help with this in the region and try to address this issue so that there is indigenous, local technological capability within the countries so that they can cooperate with the large companies from outside, but that just not be on the receiving end of their technology? Any views?
Well, I could start as a School of Public Policy. I think we have a duty to share what Singapore can do to the rest of the region, to the world. A good example would be the token. Right? That's an indigenous Singapore technology. I think countries in the region would benefit. It's not expensive. It's much cheaper than promoting lockdown, and I think that's ready to go. And you don't need expensive infrastructure to have that token for trace together, right? The other one, of course, is the examples of use cases and data governance, for example, or cybersecurity, so on and so forth. Because when you go digital transformation, you have to approach this as a holistic thing. You cannot have one law, but then you forgot the privacy law, or you forgot the cybersecurity law, or you forgot that the switching cost of technology is very high, and then you end up with very fragmented approach, right? Oh, I buy a technology here. Oh, we forgot the cybersecurity part. Oh, this thing does not talk to one another. So Singapore's example is actually very good because it's coherent. It's driven from the top. Agencies talk. And then not everything is perfect, but you learn. So Singapore provides for countries in the region, in other parts of the world, they can do what we call a second mover advantage. In business school, they teach you a first mover advantage. In digital transformation, there's a second mover advantage. Let Singapore do it first, and if it works there, okay, let's learn what Singapore is doing.
Great. One final question. Regional and international cooperation when it comes to the region. Any views on that, Francesco?
Well,
how that can help?
So, I think that cooperation across the board is extremely important. Unfortunately, I have to say that the pandemic has shown the very poor status of cooperation around the world, where pretty much every country has taken the challenge on their own. There's been very little global leadership on this issue, which is truly a global issue. So I'm not extremely optimistic right now. And also a lot of the legislative frameworks are extremely different country by country. So look, for example, some people might say that some of the solution can also come in addressing antitrust and competition issue. But countries have very different ways of looking at antitrust. And so it's very hard to have an harmonious approach across the globe. Regionally, obviously, there is ASEAN, which I think it's a good forum to actually have this kind of conversation. And by the way, already ASEAN is engaged on issues like smart cities, for example, transferring knowledge, sharing experiences. And I think it's extremely important. If I may just add one element when it comes to the solution part, I am a strong believer in the role of education. Here in Singapore, we call it cyber wellness. You can call it digital awareness. And what I mean by that is we need to start to educate everyone since the young age to how to behave in the digital sphere. As we are educating kids to how to cross the street. Today, there is a life that is in the virtual world. And we need to start to invest not only in digital literacy, which is how to use these tools, but also to learn how to behave in these environments and to learn what this technology do to us. And I think if we invest in this, and this is an important role that states can have, we're going to have better equipped citizens to deal with the social impact of these tools.
Thank you. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, we've all watched Social Dilemma in Netflix, but there's another analogy called digital dilemma, and that is all countries are better off cooperating in cybersecurity, but they don't have incentive individually to cooperate. So why would I share my secrets with you, right? You're my competitor. But they all know that they're better off cooperating, fighting a bigger state influence operation. All countries know that data portability would benefit the region, everybody. But why would a big country like Indonesia share its data trove to another smaller country, right? So it sounds like pre-WTO, right? Everybody's better off with international trade, but some countries don't want to cooperate and open up their countries. So third example, some countries start to impose digital taxes, right? Because they need the revenue and so on and so forth. But countries who produce these goods, they don't want to be taxed, but because it's discrimination, and they need to cooperate with one another, right? But thankfully, during the pandemic, Singapore, Chile, and New Zealand signed a model Digital Economic Partnership Agreement, DEPA, which I think it's very good. It's a good model for a new model of digital trade in the world. And hopefully more countries can take a look at this model. So the more they produce digital goods and services in their countries, the more that they can trade this to other countries. And it will address all issues about privacy, data security, custom clearance, fair treatment, so on and so forth. But because the current rules now are built for an industrial world, the WTO rules are built for an industrial world. They were never designed for digital trade.
Okay, great. Professor Wu.
I think actually to promote global or regional collaboration, you have to look at three determinants. The first one, belief. The second one, cost benefit. And the third one, enabling conditions. So cost benefit actually somehow can be determined by the market. But the belief and the enabling condition actually have to be borne by the government. So the government across country have to take care of this one to make sure that actually global collaboration and regional collaboration is so important for us. For all of us in the future. Now we can see the COVID hurt everyone, So definitely, integration is so important thing. But you also have to think about enabling condition from legal frameworks to physical interconnectivity. And I think ASEAN actually is doing very well. And just this month, we are going to have, ASEP. It means the ASEAN plus, on the major partner agreement, free trade agreement very soon. So I think government in ASEAN, I think working hard toward improving this three determinants. So I think that next year onward we can see a lot of good progress going to take place.
Thank you for that. So now let's go to the questions from the floor. So first question is, can we preempt disruptive technologies? It's actually asked of me, so I'll give you my answer and also I'll ask the floor to share. Preemptive to disruptive technologies require us to have capacity and capability to understand and not just react to technology. So what I would say is the key to this is to have capability and capacity in the government and not just be a recipient of the technology and react to it. What has happened in the past couple of decades is that a lot of the traditional roles of the government have now been taken over by private sector and tech companies. They're offering services, they collect information and analyze it in ways. And the key thing here to answer this question is that the governments need to understand and interact with these companies. As an example, one of the things that I really like about the way Singapore, for instance, was dealing with ride-sharing was that when the ride-sharing companies came to Singapore, the government required them to share their data feed. So when there are surge pricing or there are things happening within the platform, there's an ability to analyze that. Whereas in many other places, the technology firms go in and develop their technology. And then once a problem happens, you just immediately try to react and understand it. And it might be creating you a pacing problem because you have to spend a lot more time to react and regulate and address it. So being proactive, not just responding to challenges, but actually seeking them in advance and basically having anticipatory capacity and having the ability to react and interact with technological developments is key, in my view, to address these issues. Of course, I'm happy to hear my colleagues to share their views on this as well.
Well, just to pick up on that, because I think you reminded to us that public policy today is not a monopoly of governments anymore, because industries are deeply involved. And so maybe an idea also for industry. Currently, the innovation process does not really include a phase in which there is something called a social impact test. And what I mean by that is often this happens much later in the development of a product, maybe even once the product has been already launched. So the first idea here is to move up the design chain, those in charge of trust and safety, to include social scientists in the design phase itself. And this would ensure that the impact of a product or a service on people is also a design consideration and not just a damage control policy.
Great.
Aras, it would be futile to preempt this, and I don't think, it's like fighting the windmill Juan de la Mancha. The reason for that is that you have these platform companies like Facebook, Apple, Google. They provide a platform, and then you have millions of developers and innovators trying to solve the next problem and creating a new startup. And once you invent something and it gets popular, there's no government can stop it. TikTok, for example, it was banned, but it will always be there because it fulfills a particular need and it creates a particular addiction, so on and so forth, right? So, and no matter how you build your agility, there's always technology that will, there's always the law in regulation, which is that regulation would always lag innovation, right? So there's no point of trying to be ahead of the innovation curve. But again, second mover advantage, common sense, understanding the local context, understanding the political economy, balancing who will the winners and the losers, without stifling innovation as well, right?
Great. This basically brings us to the next question. The next question is regulation can impede or promote innovation, which is what we are talking about. Can the panel shed some light on how public policy strikes a balance here? So in my own work on autonomous vehicles, what I'm observing is that a lot of times actually there is this fear, particularly when you're dealing with large-scale innovations such as automating your vehicle fleet, that you're going to lose out if you put some checks and balances. So in the case of autonomous vehicles, in my study, most countries are allowing things to happen while they know there's a lot of risk. Singapore is an exception that has a very strict testing mechanism that's being developed. But in the United States, for instance, we had the situation that you could have an autonomous car on the land running around because they want to get the miles so that their deep learning algorithms develop better. And as a result of that, you see like people dying and crashes and accidents. So is that the case, Ed, that we can just let it happen and deal with it afterward? I'm a proponent of the idea that we need to understand it at the pace of the companies rather than after things happen. Would you disagree with that?
No, I teach a course on regulation, and I say regulation, there's a supply and demand for regulation, right? Depending on the contending forces. The demand for regulation comes from the incumbents to raise the barrier to entry, right? The supply of regulation could come from certain segments in the bureaucracy who are trying to promote certain standards, right? So that's the political economy of regulation. But not all regulation is bad. Because, take for example the European Union. The moment they introduce these new biofuels and clean standards, then everybody follows those regulations. The moment California starts to introduce regulations that promotes public good, everybody follows those public goods. So not all regulations are bad, right? In China, sense vision became popular because the Chinese government required local governments to use sensors. Which created a demand for the products of sense vision, right? If the Chinese government suddenly declares that all medicines and deliveries would now be done by drone because now we have 5G, then the drone industry would pick up, right? So regulations can create demand, for example, but regulations can also stifle innovation if it's too early and unnecessary. Right? And because a lot of regulations happen because out of fear. Take data, for example. If you talk to Department of Science or Ministry of Science or ICT, they would encourage more data sharing, portability, and that. But if you talk to security intelligence people, they said, no, we cannot share our data with others. But this is not either or. Right? Maybe some national data can stay in your country, but maybe anonymized health data can be portable. In other words, there are many ways how to deal with this. It's not a binary issues. And I think there's got to be a conversation. Schools of public policy should teach, smarter ways of regulation so that regulators will not react with their default fear of the old way of doing things.
Okay. Any other comments?
In policy formulation, we have two approaches, preventive and curative. And for the technologies that have very high degree of innovation, even revolutionary innovation, we should actually tend to take the curative approach. So if we prevent something, innovation could not take place. So you can kill the problem later on. And I really like the concept of sandbox here. MAS in Singapore, for example, very popular with using the sandbox for pilot experimentation or policy, so that it can support the fintech sector. And the fintech sector, that's why actually prospering here in Singapore.
Okay, so let me be the devil's advocate here. It's actually closer to my own view than being devil's advocate. But what I think with some of these technologies, there is a time component, as in it can be too late. When you think about ride-sharing companies, you think about technologies such as like nuclear technology and others. It is not that you can always react to them. The speed and timeliness is also very important. You can't just simply put the cat in the box again. So I think for some of these more sensitive issues and areas, we need to think about certification schemes when it's like when you think about AI, there are different levels of AI. But if a large firm is working on AI on a very sensitive area, we need to make sure, for instance, the engineers that are working in this domain understand the consequences of technologies. We have it in other domains. If you want to drive a taxi, you have to get a certificate. Why is it that if you want to develop a disruptive technology that can affect billions of people's lives, we don't have any system for that? In engineering, you always get these certification schemes. But for some of the digital stuff, particularly when it relates to computer science, we really don't have any sort of a mechanism at the moment to at least make sure everyone is educated about the topics before we move on. So I think there's more room to try to advance this. But maybe we should go to the next question, which is very interesting, and I'm going to ask Wu to expand on that. It is, what can we learn from the remarkable transformation of China? And what does that mean for the region? What can we learn from China for the region?
I think because I assess the effectiveness of policy across nations, including China, Vietnam, Singapore, and other nations. So I use a SMART model, S-M-A-R-T. So S stands for strategic choices. Strategic choices here, I mean, the interdependence between government and markets. They have to rely on both, and they have to work together very well to promote digital transformation. The second strategic choice actually related to the global integration. You have to embrace the global, forces rather than try to decouple yourself from the world. So that's why I see China still try to embrace, the global integration, overcoming a lot of challenges. The third one actually positioning. You have to do what you can do best. That's strategic choice. So the S, I mean three components here: market, government interdependence, global integration, and strategic positioning. So I think China had done very well on that one. That's the S. The M here is momentum building. We have to start with something like a pilot thing, and do not go with big bang. I look at the case of DBS here and GE in the US. DBS actually make a huge success, become the best bank in the world through actually very logical transformation. But GE go with big bang and fail. That's the momentum building. The A is mean accountability. So China exercise some agency, like in Singapore, in charge of coordinating the whole thing with strategy, very effective. And the next one, actually R, is rethinking. We have to rethink a lot. Do not actually, based on your established mindset to govern everything. We have to rethink a lot because think is the future. And the last one, I think, is trust building. For a country, actually, social capital is so important. During the COVID time or difficult time, I think social capital is only important. From my own observation here in Singapore or in Vietnam, I think great, people come together to help each other, through the Facebook platform. They can raise $1 million to help the victim, the people who suffer. So definitely on the top of technology, actually foundation of technology, we need actually social capital and also good government to do this. So I emphasize the SMART model here: strategic choices, momentum building, accountability, enhancing, rethinking, and trust building. That's actually very important lesson we can learn from the successful country in promoting digital transformation.
Ed, there's a question for you, and the question is, can you share what infrastructure, institutions, and systems need to be in place that will allow developing countries to leapfrog in digital transformation?
Myanmar is a good example. When I was there in 2012, before they opened up, a SIM card cost $2,500. Today, you go to Yangon, it costs $2.50. What did they do? They just changed their business model and then open up to 3 international operators and get the local one. So and by changing their investment model, then the infrastructure and the money flowed into the country, right? So that's a concrete example from moving from nothing, no phone to and 80% of Myanmar and the rural areas are now. They have a 4G phone. They just bypass the traditional telephone. But the other question would be what set of institutions, right? In some countries, you might not even need regulatory institutions if you have a lot of competition. For example, in the telecom business, if the industry is highly competitive, you may not even need a regulator to regulate the price, to regulate quality, because competition will be self-regulating, right? Because in developing countries, you don't have the capacity to hire a lawyer to staff your telecom because all the good lawyers have been hired by the telecom company, right?
Thank you. Francesco, there's a question for you, which is, how does digital trade agreement among Singapore and other countries dealing with, well, the question is a little bit, so the question is this, let me try to see how I understand it. How does digital trade agreement between Singapore and other countries affect multinationals? And how do we deal with the issues of multinationals when it comes to tax payment?
Well, so there is obviously a big challenge that we have here today, which is that of data nationalization, basically. Now, all this technology, by the way, that we've been talking about, are thriving out of data. So data is becoming the most important commodity here. To work well, an algorithm needs to be fed with a lot of data. Countries are becoming more concerned in terms of where these data are sitting and what countries do with this data. And so there is a growing kind of limitation of transferring data across borders, right? So I think in the future we will see more of these agreements to allow countries to transfer data in between. Obviously, Singapore here is very well positioned as a place where data can sit and then being used by other countries. And so that's why you have a lot of corporations that actually come to Singapore, because they find this as an ecosystem in which they can collect those data. Overall, countries trust Singapore, and so this data can then flow across the board. The taxation issue obviously is very complicated here, because we are way far away from any kind of truly kind of global approach to that. And to be honest with you, I don't see any chance in the few years to come to actually find any kind of agreement on having a system that is more global. Countries will find their own agreements, and I think Singapore again, it's online on that, but it will be a patchwork. It will be different groups, different coalitions, like-minded countries that will find different solutions, but no global solution from that point of view.
Ed?
Yeah, Aras, going back to your question about digital technologies in developing countries, because a lot of my students always ask me, Prof, it seems like this digital technology is only good for this middle income and high income countries. And what about those at the bottom of the pyramid who don't have the data or infrastructure or regulations, right? So I mentioned Myanmar as an example. My other favorite example is Kenya, right? It's not high income, it's not, but it's still agriculture, many rural areas, but almost 100% of their population are using this digital currency called M-Pesa, using 3G, 2G technology. It's not even high-tech, 5G, 4G. You go to a rural village, you can transact, go and buy a cigarette in a remote store. You can use your small phone and buy something. And what did Kenya do that made it quite different? Simply because there were no banks that would cater to these rural areas, the Central Bank of Kenya simply gave the telecom a banking license. So the telecom became a bank, and the bank became a telecom, and that solved the problem. So if countries follow what Kenya did by allowing their telecoms to have a banking license, then you can penetrate those areas that traditional brick and mortar banks are unable. So this is a simple but very effective solution.
Thank you very much. We're getting close to the end of our time, so I'll ask the panelists to share maybe a 20-second, 30-second closing remarks before we close the panel. Professor Wu?
I think the digital revolution actually gives a chance to every nation to prosper in the decades to come, and especially for the less developed nation, the leapfrogging possibility is very feasible, and actually we should expect remarkable changes that have the potential to be far transformational than those experienced in the early 20th century, when automobile replaced a horse-drawn vehicle or the dream of air passenger transport came to life. We are going to see flying taxi, autonomous vehicles, and people who stay here to work in office for the company in Germany or the US. So definitely globalization again take place in virtual form, and definitely a lot of value creation to be generated in future.
Thank you. Professor Mancini?
Well, let me just mention one very low-tech idea. We talked about data, we talked about algorithm, we talked about infrastructure. One important set of competence and skill that actually governments need to have is futures thinking, is design thinking, is all those set of skills that allow you to think about possibilities and then innovate. Singapore is an interesting case because it has really strength in all these set of competencies within government. So that is a lesson that also other countries can think of. How to get ready yourself to take advantage of these technologies, but also how to think ahead, right, on how this technology can be implemented in your context. These are all soft skills, not technical skills, but very important to be developed within government.
Thank you. Ed?
Yeah, let me come back to your point about certification. Because, as you said, a plumber needs to be certified. To be a surgeon, you need 10 years, 20 years to become a surgeon to operate on one person, right? And if you make a mistake, one person dies. But how many years does it take to produce a policy maker? 2 years, 3 years? And when you screw up, the whole society suffers, right? And policymakers are not even certified to screw up society, right? So I think before you screw us up in your mistakes and digital decisions, you need to educate yourself and come to the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy.
Okay, with that great closing line, I would like to thank you for joining us in this session. Next week we have the third panel on international relations titled Towards a New World Order. I hope you benefit from this session and join us next week. Thank you.